watching the Forefront Church video podcast. And wherever you're at viewing online, we just want to say thank you and welcome. And one of the ways that we can help connect with you is we want to hear from you and where you're at and how we can help. And so head over to forefrontchurch.info after the message and click the Connect tab. It's a great way for us to help you along your spiritual journey as you connect with God and learn about Jesus. And so sit back, relax. We hope that you're challenged and encouraged from today's message.
Here's what I know about you, about me, and about anybody that's ever walked planet Earth. We all need help. We all need a lift in order for us to see a better way, a new perspective, something different that we never saw before. So here's the deal. Many, many years ago, when I was in the Navy and I became an officer, I went to this gigantic ship. It was 650 feet long. It was 40,000 tons. And one of the things that I needed to qualify to do was to run the ship. And that meant being up on the bridge of the ship, which is usually the highest point and the furthest point forward on the ship. It's got a bunch of windows. There's a bunch of command and control elements that come out of there. It's where the orders are given. It's where things happen and gets filtered down throughout the rest of the ship. And the captain of the ship is ultimately responsible for everything that happens. Whether they are on the bridge or not, if something happens, they're responsible. So they have a cadre of officers that runs everything for them when they're not there. Because, the captain needs to get a meal, maybe a few hours sleep. Maybe he'd like to go to the bathroom, I don't know. But they need to have some time off the bridge. So I wanted to become one of those officers. It was one of the requirements of my job to be able to run the ship for the captain. Right now there's about 50 to 100 ships in the Navy running around right now doing amazing things all over the world in very, very difficult conditions, and they're all structured the same way. So I went up to the bridge and I started to figure out how to learn how to do this job, but I had one major obstacle in my way to doing this, and I noticed it immediately when I got up there because the windows came up to here on me. That is a problem. I needed some help. I needed to get off the ground. I needed to be able to see because, in case you're wondering, the Navy frowns on ships running into other ships and things. You have to be able to see to drive. So I went to the ship fitters. Now, the ship fitters on a ship, they're a bunch of guys and gals who weld stuff and they manufacture stuff and they repair things. And they manufactured me a fine stool. It was tall enough to get me off the ground. It was wide enough so that when we got in rough seas, I could maneuver around a little bit. They even put some non-skid tape on it to hold me there when it got really rough. So when that old gal got going, man, you fall off anything you're standing on. And they even painted my little emblem on it, so everybody knew it was mine. And I stood on that stool for a couple of years and did that job up there. But that ship was due for decommissioning, and that meant that they were going to end its service, and that would mean that everybody that was on that ship had to transfer to other ships. So I was transferred from that ship, which was in Norfolk, all the way to a ship in San Diego, California. An even bigger ship, windows just a tick higher. That captain of mine on this ship, he was kind of a prankster. He boxed up that stool and sent it to my next captain. It was a note that read, "The officer you're about to get is going to need this," before I even got there. It showed up. And I stood on that thing proudly for another 20 months as I was on that ship too. Here's the big deal with this. That's a tongue-in-cheek look at needing help. We all need help. There are things that go on in our lives that we need help. There's some things that are very, very serious. There are some things that are very minor. There are some things that are very personal. We all need a lift. We all need help to see a better way. But the problem is that we often don't like to ask for help. We don't know how to ask for help. We don't even know if anybody really cares. I mean, we make statements like, I'm just going to ignore it. It'll go away. So we don't bother to ask. Or we might be hopeless, that the situation might be so serious and so dire and so terrible that we just feel like nobody could help us, that there's no way out of this situation, so why even bother, which leads us to apathy. We just continue to go on in the same cycle over and over in our life. We never think we can see a better day. Lots of issues that we have that we need help for, and lots of issues that we don't think that we need help for that we probably do. So we're going to look at the word help today, and we have some words hanging up here. We've been in this series for the last 4 weeks or so, and the very first week, Jason started with this idea of yes and no, which was really great. He talked about boundaries. He talked about saying yes and saying no and how we do that, and what is the in-between and how difficult that can be. And then he followed up in week 2 and he talked about the word thanks, which was this idea of being grateful and being thankful. And how do we do that in a world that maybe sometimes isn't so grateful and isn't always so thankful? And then last week, he followed it up with this idea of enough, that it's okay for us to take a time out, that there's some situations and some circumstances that are not healthy for us, and sometimes we have to say enough, and we have to kind of get away. But today we're going to look at the word help. We're going to look at why we should ask for it, what happens when we start to receive it, what is the possibility or how can we see a better way if we do ask for help? And we're going to do this by looking at 3 questions. We're going to have 3 central questions in this message today. The very first question is, what do you want? The next question that we're going to talk about is, do you want to get well? And the third one is, do you believe? Like, what do you want? Well, I want to be able to see out the window. I want to be able to grab the cookies. I want my marriage to be better. I want my kids to be better. I want to feel better. I don't feel so good. There's something going on. Okay? What do you want? Do you want to get well? This is the idea of willingness and openness to actually see a healthier way in a healthier day. It's one thing to say, like, do you want to get well, but do you really want to get well? Okay, so we're going to talk about that. And then the third question is, do you believe? And this is where we start to bring in kind of a faith element to this. Like, even if you've never followed God before, you're never really sure where you land with Him, this is an excellent question to ask. Do you believe? Is there a possibility that there is a greater perspective beyond what I can see? That if I seek that help, that if I take it up a level, if I start to see something different than my current situation, are things going to be better? The faith that that's even possible. And the way we're going to look at this is we're going to look at 3 stories in the New Testament of the Bible where Jesus has direct interaction with a person or people who need help. And we're going to talk about how they kind of come together, what was the context behind that, so that they can start to understand what this idea of help is all about. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go to the Bible, and we have easy-to-read versions of the Bible out at the Get Connected table. At the lobby, you can get one. They're paper form. They're awesome. You should put your name in them. You should grab it and take it and study it. But we also have a digital version of the Bible at our digital hub at forefrontchurch.info. And there not only will you find the digital version of the Bible, but we put some notes in there to help you with today's message. All the verses that we're going to go through, you'll see them in there, and there's other ways that you can engage faith at forefrontchurch.info. Now, if you enjoy Bible, you're going to get a lot of it today. There's a lot to read. So it's going to be very informative. It's going to be very heavy in that area, and we're going to look at these 3 questions in light of these interactions with Jesus. But before we start that, let's pray. God, help is something we all know we need. Help is we sort of have a love-hate relationship with, but we know that you care about us, so you talk about it a lot. These interactions that we're going to read about are precious and sacred and beautiful, and they're going to help us to see how we can get help and how we can move forward because you love and you care about us. And we're going to run with that. We love you, and we pray this in your name. Amen. So, the very first question that we said we're going to talk about is, what do you want? What do you want? Now, in this question, we're going to read about an interaction that Jesus is having with a couple of guys along a road. He's on a road. Jesus is walking. He's heading to this place called Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem is where Jesus is going to meet his death. Now, maybe you're not familiar with the story of Jesus, and we're just really, really glad you're here if you aren't. This is a great place to be to figure that out. So what we know is Jesus is God's Son who is placed here in history at the very, very right time. And he came here as a human being. He was perfect, and his sole mission was to die for you and for me, for all the things that we've done and all the things that we will ever do. So that's Jesus, and he's on this road, and he's getting ready to have an interaction with a couple of people as he's heading to the city that is going to see him die. And we're in this writing called Matthew, which is the very first one of 4 writings of the Bible that talk about the life of Jesus. And it's in Matthew chapter 20. It's going to be up here on the screen. You can follow along with us as we go, starting in verse 29. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside. And when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked or kind of shouted him down and told them to be quiet. But they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. Verse 33, "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them, touched their eyes, immediately received their sight, and followed him. This makes sense to us. What we know about Jesus, like if you were to ask a person, even just a little bit of knowledge of him would say, well, he's compassionate and he's kind, so it kind of makes sense that he would do this. But what's really happening here? We have 2 men who are sitting on the side of the road. They're blind, yet they know that Jesus is there in the vicinity. How do they know this? They know it. They know he's there. They see their opportunity. They need help. They're going to start to engage and act in order to receive some help. Let me ask you, how many opportunities for help are around you? In your current situation, with what you have going on in your life, you know there's help available. And even if you don't know where to get it, you know that you need to. This is the situation that they're in. They are in proximity to him now. So what do? They shout louder. "Lord, Son of David." Interesting name. Who's David? David is probably the largest, if maybe not the second or third largest figure of the Old Testament. King David, of David and Goliath. You may have heard the story. But he is a direct descendant of David. God once said of David that he was a man after his own heart. So these guys know that something powerful is happening within this person. They understand Jesus to be something, if not at least divine. He has the ability to be able to help them. So what do? They closed the gap. They decreased their proximity towards him. They moved towards the mercy. If you were to think about all the things that Jesus is, kind, compassionate, and merciful, if you think about what's going on here, they're yelling louder. They're closing the gap between themselves and Jesus. They don't even have to move. It's so annoying. The people around them are yelling at them and telling them to stop. Please stop. What is that like for us? It says a lot about what we'll say about help. Sometimes we're silent. A lot of times we're silent. These guys are not silent. They're being shouted down. Do you know who shouts you down the most to get the help that you need? You? Me? In our own head, we get going. Discouragement often comes from ourselves. We're our own audience. We'll say things like, "There's no way it can get any better." I call this like the doom loop. You know what I'm talking about? That cycle of thoughts that you start running through your head. You'll never get any help. This will never get any better. Nobody really cares. You're just like everybody else. They've all got problems. Why should yours be any different? What we see in the blind men is what we really see of them is that they want to exit the darkness of their situation. And that's exactly like us. But what did they do? They didn't sit there and wait. They engaged. They got active. They started shouting. And that's what we need to do. We need to move. We need to shout. We need to decrease the proximity. We need to say, I don't care how silly I look standing on this stool. I got a place to go, and I need to be able to see. We all need help. We all need a lift to see a better way. Question number 2, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? What's going on here? Jesus is in a position to help again. Except this time, he's on travel, okay? He's heading somewhere. He's going to a festival. And he finds himself in a community setting. He's amongst a bunch of people who are ill and sick and just having a rough time with life. You know, I bet if we all got to know each other really well, we would find out that there's some people in here that are ill and sick and having a struggle and don't know what to do. Like, it's happening in here. That's the kind of community that we're talking about here. So he's going to have an interaction with somebody here and kind of talk him through his situation. And this is another story in the last of 4 writings about the life of Jesus called John, and it's in chapter 5. And it starts in verse 1, and we're going to read through this. It'll be up here on the screen. See, so the question is, do you want to get well? Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic, which is a language, called Bethesda, which is surrounded by 5 colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Verse 5, one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, and he asked them, do you want to get well? Verse 7, Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Verse 9, at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath, the law forbids you to carry your mat. Dialogue continues. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. So they asked him, who is this fellow who told you? The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. What's happening here? Jesus is in this community setting. It's called Bethesda, and it means house of mercy. So he's in the right place. He's right where he needs to be. There's all of these people here, and there's this individual who's been in this condition for like 38 years. Now, this community setting and all these people with all these things going on could be us in our current community today. He could be right there with us. So what does he say to him? He says, do you want to get well? He wants into the pool. So here's the question. There's a lot of times when we say we want to get well, but then when it comes down to actually doing it, we're not so great at doing it. So what's the action step here? He said that he wanted into the pool. The idea was if he got into the pool and the water was stirred, he would get healed. But Jesus has another idea. Jesus says, get up and walk. See, Jesus sees a possibility for him that he can't see. Jesus knows what's possible for this guy's life. He can't see what's possible for his life. He just wants into the pool. Jesus says, I see something more for you. Maybe your situation is that you just think you just need to get into the pool, but maybe there's something greater for you. Because with God, and we start to walk out what it's a life with God is like, you are going to encounter things you never expected. You're going to start to see things differently than you currently do when you're on your own. With Jesus, he sees what he couldn't see on his own. Like, let me ask you, could you conceive of the possibilities of what your life could look like, or the kinds of things that you can encounter in health and just the way you walk out your life? Can you conceive it right now with Jesus? It's very hard because a lot of us live as sort of an island. We're sort of on our own. You know, that strong-willed individual person who just says, I got this? We're kind of like this. Let me explain it to you this way. You know, if you stand at sea level all by yourself and you look out, you can see about 2.9 miles. That's if you're 5'7". So I'm seeing even less than 2.9 miles. Okay, that's the bottom line. That's one thing. Okay? But when we start to climb, when we start to get lifted up, we start to see things different. We see our whole life differently. There's this shelf at Walmart in the cracker aisle. And my favorite cracker is on the top of it. So, this is a cracker that is multigrain, gluten-free, and it tastes good. I wasn't aware those things could exist in one box, but they do. And you know, there's a lot of times that I can't see if there's any up there. That's usually when Robin's not with me. Like, my wife is taller than me. She's the duty reach it for me person, right? But so I need to get up there to see, because you know what happens is there's that one box that falls down that's kind of in the back, you know, that you can't see, but I'm getting it because these are popular crackers. They're always gone. Anyway, I really want the crackers. The question is, do you want to get well really? That was the question for the invalid. Do you want to get well really? Or are you just interested in getting in the pool? Because if you're just interested in getting in the pool, Jesus has another way. When you take one step, and then you take another step, and you start to see what's possible, and you start to get a little bit healthier, and you start to get a little bit stronger. It's not just about getting into the pool. It's not just about what we want. It's what God will lead us to. When we say, I'm going to move your way, and not stand as an island on my own and just think that I got it. Question number 3. Question number 3, do you believe? Do you believe? Now, the story that we're going to look at here is a situation of utter faithlessness. There's a situation brewing here with some people. The disciples of Jesus are around him. There's a father and a son. The son is having some trouble. Jesus' followers are right there. So there's some other people. Jesus is in the vicinity. And what we're going to read here is a situation where they have all completely decided that they don't believe what's possible. And you'll find this in Mark chapter 9, verses 17 through 27. It'll be up here on the screen, and I'll read it along. You can follow along with me. Verse 17, a man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who's possessed by a spirit, that's scary, that has robbed him of speech. When it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth. He gnashes his teeth. He becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. Verse 19, you unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought him. Then the spirit saw Jesus. It immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground. He rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Verse 21. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into a fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for one who believes. Verse 24. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. Whew. This father sounds like he's out of options. He's got a child that is got something going on that's causing him to react violently. You know, there's a big discussion in this passage about how he's possessed sort of by a demon, by a spirit, by something that's terrible. And I know that when we start talking about stuff like that, we start to think things like, that is weird. Like, can that really happen? Does that happen now? What would we even do if we saw something like that? And it would be a great topic to sit and have a cup of coffee over and talk about. But let's talk about what the main point of this is, and let's put it in perspective this way. Maybe you've had a time in your life when you've been frustrated. Like when you've, called a call center or something. Think about a time when you've been, like if you work at a call center, I'm really sorry. I'm sure you're awesome. Anyway, so let's just say you're frustrated, okay? Or something just isn't going well for you. And you get to that point where even though there's help and there's hope and there's a step that you could take, that you just don't want to hear it anymore. And you might say something like, leave me alone. Get away from me. What you're really saying is, I need help, but I don't want it right now. When you start looking around at all your options and you go, okay, I could take that step, that would get me a little way. And man, this would be good, but man, I don't want to do everything that I need to get there. And I know so many people that are just rocking it, that are crushing life, and they're all the way up there, and I'm never going to be there. And you just sort of throw your hands up and you say, I can't. That's kind of where these guys are at here. When we fight against love and we fight against wisdom and we fight against the questions that we have, what do we do and how do we move forward? Jesus kind of interrupts this scenario, right? He says, excuse me, you unbelieving generation? You start to get the idea he's a little bit irritated, right? The Father actually says, I could really use your help if you can. Like Jesus, Son of God, standing there like, if I can? Really? You're asking me if I can? Seriously right now? How about you, sir? Can you? No, you can't because you're not Jesus. I am. I can. Like, think about this situation, right? Is this possible? And he replies back, where's your belief? Where are you guys? 1 minute, everything was good, you were believing, when you run into this situation, and now what? What's our action step here? A lot of times, I will sit with people, and you've met them, and you've felt like this, and I have felt like this too, that say, I wish my faith were stronger. Then I would be able to whatever it is. This is exactly what the Father says here. Help me with my unbelief. Think about that for a second. Because what this is really about is a story of trust through prayer. Because I said that the demon can only come out through prayer. What does God want from us? He wants an interaction with us. He wants us to reduce the proximity between Him and us. He wants us to move towards the mercy. He wants us to pray the impossible when we find ourselves in need of help. Here's the question that I want you to consider the next time you start to figure out how to get out of asking for help, and it's this one. Why won't you take a step? Why won't you take the step? This is where we land a lot. We need to sit here for a minute. Why won't we take the step that we need to take? I would question that because Jesus says I can. Jesus says, hey, come on. Hey, I got you. Hey, come on. Look, you said you believed. I already got this. Have faith. You said you believe in me. Let's go. I got this, buddy. Come on up here. You got this. That's what He wants for every single one of us. Jesus says, I can. He said, and I would tell you, we all need help. We all need a lift to see the best way. But you know what we need to do? We need to tack something onto the end of that. When we ask those three questions of ourselves, there's something we need to tack onto the end of that, and the end of that is our participation is key. We all need help, we know that. We all need a lift, we know that. We know we can see a better day and a better perspective, but we actually have to actively participate, and that's what happened in all three of these interactions that Jesus had with these people. When we actively begin to answer those questions, that's following God. That's actually following God. That's actually moving towards the mercy. Every single time that you come across a situation where you need help and you start to act out and find that help and get in that moment, you're seeking out the mercy. You're decreasing your proximity to Jesus. You're going to see a different way. And the thing that happens is that when we do this, God's help becomes reflexive. Like the more time we spend following Him and the higher we go and we start to see the possibilities and the perspective that He sees for our life, the more we want to revisit this place because we know we can see something that we wouldn't normally be able to see for ourselves. That was in all three of these situations. All that Jesus wanted them to see was something different. There's a lot of you who would say, I don't like asking for help because I'd be a burden on other people. If you're a person of faith and you feel like this, one, I kind of get it, but two, let's think about that for a second. If the Son of God came to earth, let's just set aside the fact that he died for you and gave you eternal life. Let's set that aside for a second. If that's not enough for you. The very first story, what do we hear about when he interacts with the blind man? There's two words that the text says. Jesus stopped. Like he stopped for those guys. He stops for you. He cares about you. He wants to see you at your best. If you're a person that's new to faith and you've never heard this before, or you see God as condemning and judgmental and somehow wants to wreak havoc in your life, you're looking at the wrong God. That's not Him. He is loving and compassionate, and He has something for you that you cannot see for yourself, which is why He wants you to act in these good and healthy ways. There's a psalm that I go to, a verse in Psalm 28 that I go to. It'll be up here on the screen. And if you were to say, what encapsulates how you feel about God? This is just for me, this is what I would say. When I read this verse, the Lord is my strength and my shield. See, when I see God working in people's lives, when I have experienced Him working in my life, I always come away feeling like there's something stronger than me that's moving me in this moment. And this idea of shield and protection, you might think there's a lot of bad things that happen to people. That can't be true. And you're absolutely right. There are a lot of bad things that happen to people. But most of the time I need protection from myself, from my foolishness, from the things that I won't get help for, from the thoughts and behaviors that I might have rummaging around up here. That's what I need protection from. And His wisdom and His strength sets the table for me to move through that. And what do we read? We gain trust. We begin to see how much He can help us. That moves me to a different place. I'm getting up. I'm asking for help. I'm going to live in His strength and His protection and His help. Allowing Him to bring a life about for us that we could never, ever see on our own, not being an island. So I was telling my oldest daughter about using this ladder this week. And we've had this ladder for a long time. And she said, "Dad, that's a family heirloom." I said, "I don't know if it's a family heirloom or not, but we have had it for a long time." And I'm always surprised when I get up here. And you can't see what's up here, but I took a picture of it so you could see it. Be up here on the screen. And this happened first service too. So she's going to be 32 this year. She was 15 when she did this. She was painting her room some god-awful pink color. It's just what teenage girls do, I guess. It was a lot brighter and nastier than that looks. But she wrote that up here, and every time I get up here, I'm surprised by it. It's a sweet memory for me when I think about my life as her dad and watching the woman that she's become. And we need reminders. We need to be surprised sometimes. And there hasn't been a moment in my life with God where I have not been surprised and reminded when I have elevated myself to where He calls me to be. As hard as it can be to ask for help, when I get to that point and I get up and I start to look around, I go, man, there's a way forward through this particular moment. I can ask for help. See, when we say yes to everything that He has for us, when we start to answer those questions in the affirmative and we start to see what's possible and we get ourselves to the position that we need to be to really start to live the life that He has for us, we're never going to hesitate. Because we're going to end right where we started. We all need help. We all need a lift. And we're going to see a much better way and a much better perspective when we close that proximity and we move towards that mercy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Forefront Church video podcast. Our hope and prayer is that this has left you encouraged and challenged you in your faith. And you might have some questions and some ways that you want to figure this out, and we want to help with that. Head over to forefrontchurch.info, and there's a couple different ways that you can connect. Click the Connect tab and let us know how we can be praying for you, or a staff member can be contacting you this week. Maybe you have just been encouraged by this and want to support the ministry here at Forefront Church. You can click the Giving tab, as well as other tabs that are in there to help you along in your journey with God. And so we're thankful for you. Thanks for tuning in. And we cannot wait to see you again here online on the video podcast. We love you, and we'll see you then.